In November 1998, an unusual auction took place in Kyiv, Ukraine. Up for sale was a massive, incomplete aircraft carrier, the Varyag, a relic of the Soviet Union's ambitions during the Cold War. Construction on the vessel had begun in 1985 at the Nikolaev shipyard on the Black Sea. Intended to be one of the Soviet Navy's premier warships, it was designed to project power far beyond the USSR's borders. But the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 left the Varyag unfinished. At the time of the breakup, the ship was about 68% complete. It had a durable HY-80 steel hull and a partially installed steam turbine system, but no radar, no weapons and silent boilers. For newly independent Ukraine, the vessel was an expensive liability. Exposed to sea winds and salt air, the incomplete ship slowly deteriorated. Its presence at the shipyard became a daily reminder of the Soviet Union's vanished naval power and an unsustainable financial burden. While many saw the Varyag as scrap metal, certain Chinese military planners saw something else, an opportunity to break through the technological barriers that had kept China's navy limited to coastal operations. In the mid-1990s, China's naval capabilities lagged far behind those of the United States and other maritime powers. Possessing an aircraft carrier, even an incomplete one, could give Chinese engineers a rare chance to study advanced ship design, flight deck operations, and the integration of carrier-based aircraft. However, acquiring such a vessel was easier said than done. The United States and its allies were determined to prevent China from gaining carrier technology. Washington made its position clear. If Ukraine were to sell the ship, it could only be transferred to a private buyer, not a government or military organization. This restriction seemed to close the door on any official Chinese purchase. Behind the scenes, influential figures in China began crafting a workaround. One of the key players was a Beijing-based financier named Xiao Chun, who understood both the opportunities and the obstacles. Xiao recognized that the only path forward was through a civilian front, a company that could claim to have purely commercial intentions. The cover story would need to be convincing enough to pass international scrutiny while giving China full access to the vessel once it reached Chinese territory. In Hong Kong and Macau, Xiao's associates established a tourism and entertainment company. On paper, the goal was to convert the Varyag into a floating casino and theme park. The plan was backed by the necessary business registrations, a Macau casino license, and even import permits for the ship. By framing the purchase as an investment in leisure and tourism, the group created a plausible reason for buying the ship while sidestepping the appearance of direct military involvement. When Ukraine eventually decided to auction the vessel publicly, several bidders appeared, including a Japanese group offering $18 million. The tourism company's representative, acting as Xiao Chun's agent, raised the bid to $20 million, securing the purchase. For observers, it seemed like an eccentric business decision. Why would anyone spend $20 million on a rusting warship for a casino project? But for those behind the scenes, the bid marked the success of a carefully orchestrated operation. In July 1999, the Varyag was prepared for towing from the Black Sea to China. Since the ship had no engines, the journey would rely entirely on tugboats, a slow and costly process. The first major obstacle came at the Bosphorus Strait, controlled by Turkey. Under pressure from the United States, Turkey imposed heavy financial conditions, including large deposits and strict maritime safety requirements. The delays and docking fees began to drain the buyer's finances rapidly. The ship was stranded in the Black Sea for 16 months while negotiations continued. Ultimately, a combination of economic incentives and diplomatic promises helped resolve the standoff. China offered to send more tourists to Turkey, provided economic aid, and secured guarantees from Greece to assure safe passage. On November 1, 2001, the Varyag was finally allowed to pass through the Bosphorus, escorted by 11 tugboats. The journey to China was far from straightforward. Heavy winds and rough seas in the Aegean threatened to push the powerless vessel into the Greek islands. The refusal of the Suez Canal authorities to allow passage forced the convoy to take the long route around the Cape of Good Hope, adding thousands of miles to the trip. Along the way, there were risks from piracy in the waters near Somalia, as well as constant strain on the towing equipment. By the time the Varyag reached Dalian port in northeast China on March 3, 2002, the towing costs alone had exceeded $30 million, more than the original purchase price. Upon arrival, Chinese engineers found that much of the ship's original technical documentation was missing. Key components of the propulsion system had been removed, and detailed blueprints had been taken by Russian intelligence before the sale. What remained was essentially a steel shell, valuable for its size and design, but incomplete in every practical sense. This was the starting point for one of the most ambitious reverse engineering projects in modern naval history. Over the next decade, Chinese shipbuilders and engineers worked to rebuild the ship from the inside out. The task was monumental. Without complete blueprints, every system had to be studied, measured, and in many cases redesigned from scratch. Special steel welding techniques were developed to match the vessel's hull materials. Arresting cables for carrier-based aircraft landings were installed with millimeter-level precision. Propulsion systems had to be entirely reconstructed. The work demanded long hours and harsh conditions. In one notable case, a veteran engineer, Liaoning, died after working 48 consecutive hours in the engine room. Many workers endured sub-zero temperatures to test components and ensure durability. This effort was not simply about refurbishing an old ship, it was a crash course in modern carrier construction for China's shipbuilding industry. On September 25, 2012, after more than a decade of work, the refurbished vessel, now renamed the Liaoning, was formally commissioned into the People's Liberation Army Navy. For China, this marked a turning point. The country now had its first operational aircraft carrier, giving it new capabilities for power projection and naval operations far from its shores. The Liaoning was not just a warship, it was a training platform. Chinese naval aviators began carrier flight operations, deck crews learned new procedures, and shipyards gained the experience needed to design and build new carriers indigenously. The acquisition of the Varyag, and its transformation into the Liaoning, had long-term consequences. It allowed China to leapfrog years of naval development, gaining hands-on experience with carrier operations that would have been otherwise inaccessible due to technology restrictions and embargoes. Since then, China has launched newer, more advanced carriers built domestically. These developments have expanded Beijing's ability to operate in the South China Sea, project power in the Indo-Pacific, and influence maritime disputes. The Liaoning itself remains in service, often appearing in naval drills and joint exercises. But its greater legacy lies in what it taught China's engineers and military planners, lessons that are now shaping the next generation of Chinese aircraft carriers. The story of the Varyag's journey from a rusting hulk in Ukraine to a symbol of Chinese naval ambition is more than just a tale of engineering and persistence. It is a case study in strategic patience, the use of civilian fronts to achieve military goals, and the careful blending of diplomacy, finance, and technical expertise to bypass international restrictions. For China, the operation succeeded beyond its immediate goal. It not only gained an aircraft carrier, but also the industrial knowledge to build more. For the rest of the world, it is a reminder that strategic competition often plays out quietly, through deals and maneuvers far from the battlefield, yet with consequences that can reshape global power balances for decades to come.